Hello, you guys. Welcome, welcome. I'm really excited. This is our first watercolor palette for 2025, and lots to celebrate, right? I mean, we've been doing this for over a year. Some of you have been with me for the entire year since I started with these palettes. They arrive in the month. If you haven't yet signed up, I encourage you to do so because they're so much fun. They are handmade watercolors. You get a sampler palette and lessons, and we do the videos, and there's a whole group of people that are doing it together, and you can be part of the community. In any case, let's break into the Northern Lights subscription package and see what kind of goodies we have in store for us. Okay, so excited. So excited. Can't believe it's 2025. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you guys this too. What do you think of these? I just got them in, and I was going to put them in our store in Jack's Watercolor for you to order for Valentine's Day. I haven't shipped out the February subscription yet, so as we're just finishing getting that ready, I thought if anybody wanted to order these, then you would get these, this really cool little butterfly, like gold and red cover, and then a Fabriano watercolor card that is 300 GSM, 140 pound paper. It is beautiful, and I thought these are so cute. So I have these. All right, so if you like them, I have a couple packs of them, so you can order them. I guess, I don't know, either maybe we'll just do them in sets of 6. How's that? All right, beautiful, right? Yeah, if you like stuff like that, let me know. I will definitely keep finding them and carrying them in the future to go with the watercolor cards. So in the Northern Lights subscription, you will find 2 decorative envelopes. These ones are, I believe most of them are red, or I don't know. I think they were red. Some of them might be blue, because I think we had some blue left over from the Christmas ones that are like dark blue. And they have a Fabriano 300 GSM card in here if you would like to make maybe a Valentine's Day card early for these, or want to save them up and use them for, you know, birthdays or whatever, or once you get the Northern Lights down and you want to create Northern Lights cards. That's really great to have on hand too. This paper is amazing. Yes, it is different than the regular blocks that you buy from Fabriano. It's 100% cotton, but this is the archival quality that only comes in very large sheets. So we make these here and put them out in deckled edge cards for you guys. You can order them on my website. They actually, you can order them in cards with the matching envelopes, or you can order them in 5x7 sheets. But they come in the watercolor subscription. You'll also find some sampling paper. This is 100% cotton, smooth on one side, textured on the other. Great paper to sample all of the stuff in. There's a Northern Lights card giving you some ideas of what we're going to be painting. This is really cool, right? Just kind of giving you an idea of like the reflection on water and what this might look like. There's also a Northern greeting here, which says, this is the time of year when winter feels long, and it does, right? We just got through the holidays and we're feeling ready for spring. I am. I mean, the cold wind's blowing. Let's make a really nice hot drink and get our little puppies together and paint the Northern Lights as nature intended. I think you'll just love these watercolors as you use them. They're so beautiful for layering. They're so pretty for the streaks in the sky and the rich blue. There's so much that can be painted with this palette, you know, and as you know, many of these palettes, I mean, don't you just want to just order them as a palette? I do, because I think that they're so inspiring and I love painting with them. So hopefully the colors will inspire you and make these dull winter days a little bit brighter. Misty's joining me here. You can see her. She's precious. She's my little girl. You'll also find a Northern Lights watercolor card with some more ideas for doing the Northern Lights. You can see like different ways, different styles and directions. So really anything goes as far as the challenge. Every month we do a challenge, and the challenge this month will be to use this palette and the supplies to create your own version. I want to see the good, the bad, whatever it is, show it off, because everybody loves to see them. And even when you think that you didn't obtain, you know, like even when you think you didn't do it right or you didn't get something that you liked, it's probably going to surprise you. You might wake up the next day and really love it. So when I say work from light to dark as the layers dry, I find there's two ways of doing this Northern Light look. You can either do wet on wet or wet on dry. If you do wet on wet and you work from light to dark, you want to lay in the lights first and then let those dry once you get all the layers in, and then add the dark blue. Otherwise, it will combine with the other colors, which also might be something you like. So it really just depends on you specifically. We're going to try it a couple of different ways in these tutorials, so don't worry, I have you covered. But I find that if you put the lights in and then you let them dry and then you add the darks and add water, it's going to give you that nice blended look anyway, and it might be a little more dimensional. So whether you start with a wet background like it says here or a dry background, it's really up to you. I do find though that the colors are so pigmented, so it will work either way. But if you do wet on wet, it's going to be more blended. And if you do wet on dry paper, of course, it's going to be extreme color, but not as blended, unless you spend some time washing it down, which is going to wash out some of the pigment because it's going to end up on your paper towel. So I don't know. We'll just kind of like play with both ways, and you need to use the scratch papers to play with that as well. But we'll go over some. So then we have the watercolor card, and this is for swatching. All of these are watercolor papers, so you can use the backs of them. They're all really beautiful papers. The only one that's not a watercolor paper is this one. So this one is for swatching all of these lovely colors. There is an ultramarine, oh, I got two of them. There is an ultramarine blue in this watercolor palette, and it is gorgeous. It is sourced from a mine. It's actually mine sourced. So I think you're really, really, really going to enjoy it. I actually have another version of this that's just come out in honey pots that's even a little more textured and thicker. This one is a little bit more like, I don't know, I think it's like a little bit more light so that it will blend over the Northern Lights and not like compete with it as much. But the ones that I just made honey pots for are even more like more pigmented, if that is even a thing, right? So let's swatch out the colors while we're here. And we will enjoy one of these new brushes. I love these brushes. These brushes are also available on my website at Jack's Watercolor. Why can I never open these? I just can't do it. I'm gonna really ruin my teeth trying to get these open. Come on. I don't have this size either. There we go. This is a size 6. I send out like a variety of sizes in these. So just get some clear water, and we're just gonna rinse out the brush, wipe it out on your paper towel. Yay! Turn up my lights a little bit here. Make sure I've got real bright lights. Okay, so excited. All right, so I like to have a little more swatching area as well as the card. If you guys have any of these little like swatch books to keep all this stuff in, like if you're collecting a swatch book to keep this in, then you want to put it on this card, right? And then keep it in your book. And that's why they're this great size, because they're really, really easy to store so that you can kind of have a mental record of all of your watercolor palettes that we've done. And then maybe one day, you never know, you might want to like try and gather the watercolors from one of these palettes to actually work with on a daily basis, you know, which is totally possible because I make the watercolor. So right now I'm just going to add just a drop This is handmade honey watercolor, highly pigmented with no preservatives, no fillers, nothing but beautiful, beautiful pigment and an all-natural binder. So they re-wet just lovely. You can never have enough, actually. It's never enough. So the first one is my ultramarine. You can see this one is really, really gorgeous. Such a pretty blue. It's going to be so, so handy. So we can lay it on thick, we can lay it on thinner, and this is what I like to kind of like see how they're working on the sample paper. And then I like to add just a little bit of water, push it around, and let it dry. Oops. So now let's go ahead and put it. It says try mixing ultra with some of your other colors. So I'm just gonna take a little ultra and I'm gonna put it there. And I'm gonna take some and I'll put it here. And that allows me just to kind of mix it around. So next, let's go to the first one, which is Night Sky. Ugh, I just love this color. This reminds me of kind of like a perylene green, or like a green shadows. It's definitely going to be stunning in this palette, because it's just got like this ability to have shadow. So let's add a little water to it. So pretty. The next one is Northern Turquoise, which I don't think I actually am doing Northern Turquoise. I think this is Phthalo Green. Yeah. This one is Phthalo Green. Phthalo Green has a Viridian quality to it, but it does not granulate. Viridian is very similar, but even a little more pigmented and granulates. Phthalo is going to be great for this because it's not going to add a lot of heavy weight to your watercolor painting when we go to put in like the Northern Lights, right? The next one is Northern Violet. Northern Violet is a beautiful, beautiful violet. It's very subdued, but just a lovely, lovely color that plays so, so well with these blues. It does add a hint of granulation. It's a bit like thicker, but it also can be thinned, as you can see on this sample here. You can go thinner, or you can build up the color. It's a beautiful, pure, single pigment color. If you noticed, most of these, with the exception of Night Sky, are single pigment colors because we're gonna do a lot of mixing. Next, we have Northern Turquoise. So this is a slightly different color to my Cobalt Turquoise, which is currently available on my website. The Cobalt Turquoise is, I would say, just a little more green, maybe, like turquoise, where this one is a little more blue, like the blue side of turquoise. So, so pretty. This is still, though, PG50. So I sourced some amazing PG50 just recently, and that is what you're getting in this palette, pure PG50. So it is granulating. Also remember that because it is a cobalt color, the root of this is cobalt. So this is the one color in this set that has cobalt in it. Other than that, the rest are completely non-toxic without any metals or anything like that in them. This one is Northern Yellow, so it is slightly more vibrant than the typical Sunshine Yellow that I carry in my store as part of a base palette, and it was particularly engineered to do really, really well with many of these colors so that it would combine well, give us some vibrancy. We could always depend on it to be that really, really bright yellow when we needed it. Aren't those pretty colors? So much fun. But most all of them will mix so well together. And I would say, as you know, that if you mix purple and yellow, it's going to kind of cancel itself out. So you want to try and put a buffer color in between if you're going to use a lot of the purple. And the buffer color would be like any of the blues would buffer great, or even the night sky wouldn't do bad either, you know. So we mix that with yellow. Let's try this one with a little bit of the green. Oh, that's gorgeous. Oh, I want that in my sky for sure. Yeah, I like that. And I actually think I would mix it in with this, and I think that would be a really pretty combination. Do you see that? So the ultramarine to the phthalo green to the northern turquoise is a really beautiful, stunning combination. The yellow mixed with the ultra blue, that green is more earthy, so I feel like that's nice, but not as nice as this combination here. I think that's going to be like the striking, beautiful combo for sure, you know? Can't go wrong with that. Okay, so let's try a couple of practices before we move on to another video and paint a northern sky project. So this first practice is going to be split into two ways. One is going to be wet on wet, and the other one is going to be wet on dry. So you want to practice this a little bit before you actually go to do your painting. So this is going to give you a couple of ideas, and it's going to give you a feel for the watercolor. It's also going to give you a feel for if you find it easier for you to paint wet on wet or wet on dry. So while we're doing the wet on dry, let's just go ahead and add a little bit of water evenly to our surface. I'm adding a little more than usual just to really saturate it and get it wet, because it's going to dry a bit while I'm painting the other side. We can always re-wet it, but I just want to kind of let it sink in to the watercolor paper. Then the wet on dry, I always like to start with the lighter ones first. So let's just grab some northern yellow and maybe reach for your sample card just to get just to remember some different ideas and stuff that you could do here. So for the wet on dry, let's go ahead and do some really striking stuff. Laying our bright yellow in there. And then what did we say? We liked the phthalo green, right? So I'm gonna lay in some phthalo green. So you can see with the dry, how it really stays in place. It's not gonna be blending, right? And then I'm going to take some of my cobalt, my northern turquoise, and lay that in. Okay, so what do we do now? Now you can see it's really striking. So we can leave it that way and let it dry, or we can add some water. Different ways to add water are, of course, you can add it from your brush and then just kind of let it blend a little bit. Like if I want to maintain some of the yellows, but I want them to blend a little bit. But you can see it's a much streakier look unless you start getting the paint like really wet, which you can. You can definitely pull this around. Now, this is one of those paintings that you have to trust in the process. It's going to be like, oh my God, what am I doing? Right? And that's why I'm walking you through these two different ways of doing it so that you can try them both and you can also see the process of it. So you can see I'm just kind of wetting the edges and blending. And then if I want to get more yellow, I can always bring more yellow in. But see, it's pretty striking, right? And sometimes you can maintain some pretty big borders, or you can let it blend like I'm doing. You can even grab some more watercolor and go back in. Okay, so now let's go to our wet on dry side. I'm just gonna re-wet this just a bit, just get it moving. Again, starting with my yellow. I'll go this way. Okay, let's grab another color. So I'll just do the same colors. So you see how it's not as vibrant, right? You have to use more of the color. But I'll use the same colors. Let's take a little blue. There we go. So now with the wet on wet, you can see right away it wants to bleed into each other. So what I would do is put a little paper towel here and either take your brush, or you can take a spray bottle and you can literally just add a little water and encourage it to blend. So this is why we practice, so that you can get a feel for it and not feel like this is running away with you. You know, if you want to add more, all you have to do is just add more in. Add more. You can just keep adding if you want, you know, and you can make it more dark. So, but wet on wet is great because it automatically just kind of blends things, right? But then you do have to wait for it to dry. But it does, you can see, it just uses a lot more watercolor. But so I'm gonna keep it this way. And I can clean up borders if I want just by using a dry. Like if I want to maintain some of the yellow areas. You can go back. You can just add a little more color. You know, if you want it really striking. So see, two different ways, both very, very good. Okay, so now that we have our practice down, we're gonna get out the really nice watercolor paper, the Fabriano, and we're gonna wet both sides to do a Northern Lights beautiful piece of artwork. So whether you use your paintbrush or your spray bottle, spray both sides, because this way you don't have to tape it down and you can pop this up and kind of directionally change where the water flows. Very, very easy. But if you don't want your watercolor paper to buckle, wetting both sides is the key to that. So I'm just kind of getting a nice sheen on here, letting the paper absorb some of the water so that everything flows. But I still do want the watercolor attaching to the paper. So we're going to start with our lights and start adding in color and letting that kind of sit on the paper and be drawn in. Now the Northern Yellow does have a little bit of staining, and that is kind of necessary for this to work. Otherwise it will go wash back out to white. And I think that if you have a little bit of staining but transparent yellow, that really does help, and that's one of the keys to getting the Northern Lights really well. The other one that is in your palette is the phthalo green. That is also a staining or semi-staining, non-granulating color. If you use granulation at this point, it is going to look good, but it also is going to attach to any blues that you have that you add later. So you want to kind of start with the like semi-staining, non-granulating colors and let those mix in together. And so I'm telling you this because if you decide to add any other colors to your mix, quinacridone are better because they're non-granulating. Otherwise, you're going to start with granulation and it's going to stick, and then it's probably going to cover up the brightness of the yellow. So we don't want that to happen. So I'm just adding in colors. I'm adding in a little bit of my ultramarine blue, my phthalo green, keeping the ultramarine to the outer edges and not putting in too much, because remember, when this gets wet, the granulation in the ultramarine is going to attach itself to the paper, and that can cover up some of your lights. So you do want to go sparingly at this point in time and use more of those other granulating colors later on in our painting, not earlier on in our painting, because we're going to do a wash. This is a little bit of the cobalt, which is the northern turquoise, and this is granulating, right? So we definitely want to go gingerly with it and keep it to the outer edges so that it doesn't really get in the way, but I do want it kind of washing through. It is the one exception to this rule, because wherever you put the cobalt, that northern turquoise is going to leave a lasting impression. It's going to leave like a haze of like this aqua green that's really pretty. So just experiment with it. I honestly have to tell you though that experimenting on the sample papers compared to the real paper is just two different worlds. So don't be hard on yourself. So now I'm taking a spray bottle. You can also just wet your brush and start to drip a lot of water in the direction that you want it to run. Now you can see where the yellow was, some of it will wash back to white. We actually like that to happen because northern lights are lights. We don't really need the absence of light. We need more light. So what we're trying to do is a mix of transparency and colored light. And that's what I'm using the yellow to mix with the phthalo green to get that really bright chartreusey green, and then also mix it with a little bit of my cobalt turquoise while leaving some of my northern turquoise in there. And now I'm using a little bit of the ultramarine blue just to get that like kind of punch of blue. But remember, that is going to be a gorgeous, gorgeous lavender blue color in your sky, but you don't want it rolling over everything because it will attach to the paper and leave you a little bit of granulation. I happen to like the look of a little bit of granulation. I feel like it just really works and it makes it look so much different, but you know, you don't want it all over the entire thing. You want those whites, you want those yellows to be really punchy, so you got to keep it kind of away from those areas. But just experiment. Don't be scared of this. I think a big thing is being intimidated by it, because that's what is really going to hold you back. So don't worry about ruining your paper. When it all dries, you're always going to end up with something that you can use. So at the bottom, I just kind of like cleared off a little bit with a little bit of water, just so I can kind of get an eye for which direction things are going, and if I'm going to maybe use that as the bottom or the top as the bottom and flip it over. I'm also adding streaks of just yellow paint in there and a little bit of the dark in that ultramarine blue. I just really love the way ultramarine blue looks when it's dried in this scenario, and you'll see what I mean as it dries. Now remember, we want to continuously keep this wet and keep this water flowing. The more it flows, the better the result will be with the least brush marks or dramatic lines within your blends. So although I am kind of scratching in some more color here, well, I didn't mean to say scratching. I'm not scratching the paper, but just kind of like scraping it in with my brush. I'm still kind of just going for a little bit of shot of color of yellow in there, and not necessarily trying to get it where it's just all color, right? We want those transparency pieces of white to remain in there too. So we're gonna go and take a little more water, a little more color, and just alternate back and forth until we get something that just feels good, you know? I'm keeping my paper also tilted upwards so that it continually runs that direction, because that's the way that I've painted this. If I painted it the other way, I might want to do it differently. I might want to tilt it to the left or to the right. So just keep that in mind, depending on which way it's comfortable for you to add and subtract and add water, but the flow should always be going in one direction. So let's put this on the side, and we're going to do a second one so that we have two amazing versions. Just experimenting more and more and more. It's so much fun. So I'm wetting both sides of the paper as usual, and taking my brush, dipping it into the Northern Yellow, which is what I like to start with. And this one I'm just gonna kind of think about a skyline, you know, like the horizon line being more yellow and mixing in with some of the brighter colors. So the reason why I did it this way is I wanted to see the contrast of just having all the colors run into the yellow at the base of the painting, rather than have it just be stripes like the other one. And it's just really just to see if the yellow grabs the paper and makes a difference. So you can see I'm taking some phthalo green, just kind of smooshing it around randomly, very randomly. Still keeping those streaks to be in one direction. So I'm not gonna take my brush and run it horizontally across them if I've already done vertical streaks, with the exception of adding the yellow in the beginning. Now I'm adding some water, just kind of letting those flow, pushing it with the water, tilting my page down also. That is very, very necessary. Now if you don't have a spray bottle, you can just do what I'm doing here, where you add water to your brush and just kind of encourage it to flow in that direction. You don't really want to like scrub this. You just want to go very, very lightly with a very light touch. And then I'm just going to add in some phthalo streaks. Like this is phthalo green, so it is semi-staining, and it's really not going to wash away that much. It will wash a little bit because this paper is already wet. So being that it's saturated, it's not going to grab like if we did the wet on dry. Wet on dry, you wouldn't get the green to move that much. Not that much. It would blend, but not really have the buffer, you know, of the water. But isn't this pretty? Once you see one or two of these done, you're going to get a better feel for how much bleeding you like and how much control you want in which direction things are going to go. Also, how thick you want to paint, how dramatic you want your streaks to be, and what happens when you put like that ultramarine insert in there, or some cobalt turquoise, which is the base of the northern turquoise. Very similar, just a little bit more, just a little shift off to the blue side. So this is a very, very messy tutorial. You might want to spread some towels around, and remember the semi-staining stuff is going to get all over your hands. So after we're done, you want to wash with some soap and water, get some warm water there, and maybe even use a little bit of white vinegar to get it off of your cleaning surface. So now I'm just adding some water from my water dish and keeping that flow going. I want to see just creatively what appeals to me, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for shifts in the color, possibly playing with like leaving some white in the areas, or what it would look like if I just kind of painted more dramatic, like lightning streaks, you know, almost like tornadoes were coming down, to see what that looks like when it dries. So I added a little bit of cobalt turquoise in there, and I'm being very ginger with it. I'm trying to encourage it to flow and not backflow into the yellow. I'd like it to just kind of be more of a streak rather than a spread. So I'm using water to control that and keep it very, very fluid, so that we don't get like too many fingers, you know, like the little finger stretches into the other colors. Can you imagine what core would do? I mean, with the way it pushes watercolor around, I don't even know that Northern Lights can happen with core watercolor. Any case, I love this yellow. This yellow is just so, so pretty. It's so bright, so vibrant. It's just what we needed for this project. And I think the phthalo green worked out really well. I had toyed around with maybe doing phthalo blue here, but I thought, I think I like the drama of the green because it's just got that like attitude, right? It's really pretty. And the ultramarine gives you a little bit more of the blues. And then we always have the northern turquoise, and that's in the blue range too. So it just kind of made sense. On these tutorials, I'm not using the northern violet yet because I just didn't want to introduce it until later in tutorials. I think I'm going to try it in some of the upcoming ones just to see what happens. Now you could add northern violet as a little accent across like a lake or in like say a little strike of color. Say you're doing like a city line or something like that. That would be a really fun thing to go back in and add. There's a lot of things you could do with the northern violet for sure, especially with the northern turquoise on its side. So as you can see, I'm just using a clean, kind of semi-dry brush to peel back some of the layers and see if I can get even more of the whites coming through. This would actually just dry great on its own, if we wanted to leave a lot of light there. But I think I'm just gonna keep challenging myself to play with color and just add and subtract until I get like just blends that are really appealing to me. You can see the other one is already drying really well. And remember, there is a dry shift. So watercolor will always dry pretty much lighter than it is when you laid it down. So you want to kind of exaggerate the color and go a little heavier. And in some cases, I just dip my brush right in there, especially with the yellow, and I just put it right on the page. Because when I do the wash, I, will end up with a lot lighter version. So let's clean up our space just a little bit here, and we are going to take the next step on this one. Pretty excited. So now I'm dipping into the night sky and just putting it in my palette, mixing in a little bit of the ultramarine just to kind of blue it up a little bit. So I have a little more blue shade to pick up the blue that I put into the sky on the sides. I want kind of like a smokier, shadowy shade. So adding a little bit of ultramarine is just gonna tint it just ever so slightly. So now I'm starting to add what will be the darker portions of the sky. Now, we're not going to leave them this dark, although you're welcome to do something really striking if you'd like, and it just looks good to you and you like it. I'm striving for something a little more blendy. So I'm just kind of adding this, knowing that we're going to do a wash and it is going to hit and kind of put a haze over the entire thing, which I think actually makes it look even more natural and better while maintaining those really, really pretty shifts of color. If you don't let this color wash over your watercolor, you're gonna have that like more bright look, right? So it's up to you. You could add this in light layers and keep going with it, but I just really like the randomness of wetting it down, so that's how I'm gonna do it. Okay, get ready, because we're about to hit it with water. And you're probably like, oh my God, it is totally gonna get wrecked. This is where you have to trust in the process because you're gonna see this smoky kind of blue-green color just kind of going over all your beautiful blends, and you're gonna be like, no. This is where you wanna keep it going though, because remember, this is dry. So we're re-wetting after we applied the color. So we put the color in place, give it like a second, and then just start dousing it with water. Now my spray bottle is not really strong. It is more of a mist, so it's not going to add a stream of spray, and that's really important. You want to try and use a misting spray rather than a stream. If you do use a stream, then try and aim the stream like I'm using the brush here with some clean water in one direction. So start at the top and kind of force the watercolor down. Now, whichever way you tilt your page is the way that things are going to run. So remember, if you're trying to maintain certain colors in certain areas, you definitely want to either not use the water in those areas, or keep in mind that you've got to tilt it so that it runs in that direction. A little reminder that you are going to get a dry shift. So remember, even though things are looking very covered up, it is going to dry, and you're going to kind of see some of that transparent color through it. So always maintain as much light as you can, but at the same time, go with the flow. Don't worry about too much of it closing up the gaps, because you will still see a lot of really cool color. So I'm adding in now, a lot of people don't do it at this stage. They just leave it be and do a wash and then let it dry. I'm actually adding in some shots of color because I just want those like little shots of streaming color, almost as if like there's a prism that is kind of like casting more light on the northern lights, you know what I mean? And I find that this is a good way to do it. I do sometimes get a little bit of like a shadow streak from adding the color later, but I actually really like it. And you'll see what I mean at the end. There's some pieces that will like kind of look a little more vibrant in color because of the way I'm applying it. It's just my personal artistic judgment, to tell you the truth. You can't really do this wrong, by the way. You pretty much can only do it right, because even if you get a more smoky version, there are so many versions of the lights and the northern lights that there is no real wrong way to do it. I don't think. I can't think of a wrong way, you know? I think the only thing that would mess it up would be not blending the darks with water. I think if you didn't blend any of the darks on the edges, I think that that would be more trouble than anything else, right? Sorry if I'm out of the screen just a little bit, but I'm going to show it to you in just a second. All I'm doing is just adding some darks, and I needed this a little bit closer to me to do it. I'm just kind of dipping my watercolor brush into the paint and just kind of adding darks. Now this is a version of Strikes of the Night Sky and also Strikes of the Ultramarine right on the page. And then I'm just using my brush just to kind of pull things down, which is just intuitively something I just felt the need to do for some reason. But it works out in the end. It works really good. And don't forget these harsh edges we can soften with just a little bit of water, whether it be clean water or your spray bottle. So right now all I'm doing is just using some water, dragging it along the edges of the watercolor to soften, and trying to encourage some of the lights to still be very, very transparent. And just helping things along. Really, you can just do this with a spray bottle if you want and leave caution to the wind. I don't know, I tend to sometimes want to control it just a little bit more and add like certain colors in certain places. And I know we really shouldn't do that, but I can't help myself. Why not? Why not try it and see if it turns out? It turns out. If it doesn't, it just, who cares? We'll just do another one. So now we've got some of these really, really big, bold colors laying back in. Again, a lot of people don't do this at this stage. They just lay the color in, let it dry, and then put in the darks, and then wash it out, and bam, that's it. I just like to play with it. I really do like to fiddle with it a little bit more. I find that it just, I don't know, it makes it look more glowy to me. And then, of course, I go back out and spray it so that I could just continue the bleeds. Looks cool though, right? Like I have a little bit of teal in there now. I have that because that mixed with the turquoise and the green and the yellow. And I have a little bit of the ultramarine kind of shadowing through, which I think is really neat. And then I have a little bit of the northern turquoise that's coming up a little brighter now, which I really like too. So I wouldn't have gotten that though if I wouldn't have added more color in after I put the dark and let it kind of sit together. So we're gonna set that aside. It looks really cool and melty and interesting. And let's play with this one just a little bit. We're gonna add the darks to it. Okay, so let's dive into the night sky, which is the base of our darks, and add a little bit of water, just kind of get it to that nice fluid state where it's got heavy watercolor pigment, but it still has a little bit of play. So I'm going along the edge to make the outer edge a little bit darker, and this has also got a little bit of that ultramarine blue that I'm pulling through. I just really love that lavender color of the ultramarine. I think it's so, so pretty, so have to have it. Then I'm leaving some streaks right up at the top and just adding nice, wet, big streaks of the dark color that I mixed. Adding a little more ultramarine in there, I think, is really kind of fun. But again, remember, it is going to increase the granulation, which increases the hazy look. I happen to like the hazy look though. I think it really kind of washes over the entire thing and tones it a bit, and you'll see what I mean. As you can see the top one drying, you see that hazy look as opposed to like the stark look. I just really like the haze. I think the haze looks more natural and it looks more, I don't know, it just looks more dimensional perhaps, right? I think that's maybe the thing I'm thinking of. So anyway, I'm just kind of painting down, making like a curtain of darks, and the longer they sit there without water, the more dark they're gonna grab. So we do want to hit this with some water on the edges soon so that we don't have any harsh lines, but we do have a little bit of time as long as it doesn't dry entirely. All right, let's hit it with some water. This is kind of the fun part. In a way, it's the scary part, but it's really the fun part because you can't leave it like this. Again, we're in this fun but ugly stage of like, this looks ridiculous, but it doesn't, because I know it's going to turn out good. I'm going to love it. So by wetting it, see how that blends? It's already starting to just kind of melt together. Sometimes I use a little paper towel just to peel back some of the color, like if there's a lot of granulation and I feel like it's a little heavy over the yellow and I want to preserve it. By using a paper towel, you're partially drying that yellow area, and you'll see that it kind of like makes it brighter when it dries completely, which is really good if you're doing like a mountain scene and you want that bright yellow against the dark shadow. So just thinking ahead just a bit, just by drying it a bit with a paper towel. But still, the edges still have to kind of be damp, and as we add the darks and we just keep painting these layers in, I'm adding a little more phthalo, I'm adding a little more ultramarine, just to keep those tones in there. And my thought process is keeping green and blue next to the yellow. We wouldn't want to put the violet next to the yellow at this stage, because it would produce more of a dark that you probably won't like the outcome. So I am keeping the violet out of this because there's so much yellow. But feel free to use like the white of the paper, the violet, the northern turquoise together. Those would be amazing. And you could even work the yellow into your painting as long as it's next to either the northern turquoise or the green. Just don't put it next to the violet. So wetting down the paper is just loosening up the darks. But as you can tell over on the side, I'm not trying to loosen up those darks too much. I want some of this grabbing to the paper. On the left side, you'll see what it looks like if you use a lot more ultramarine, and on the right side, you'll see what it looks like if you use mainly night sky. I just wanted you to kind of see the difference. I also added, don't forget, a lot of phthalo green while I was adding the darks. And I'm gonna really rinse this down because I really want to maintain a lot of light. And remember, it is ultimately going to dry differently. So now I've got some of that haze across. I'm gonna go back in and add a little more of my darks back in a more dramatic way. The haze is already blended all those colors together. And that's what I mean by like the haze, right? Now we don't have like stark lines. We have like really beautiful blends. It's almost like putting powder on your face, right? Like finishing powder just kind of like blends the makeup together and just makes it look so much better. That's how this looks to me. It's kind of like it works the same way. If I didn't do that step and it didn't kind of get a haze over it, that melty haze just makes it just look so much more finished. So this is the more dramatic dark stage, and ultimately after these kind of take hold, we are going to wash them out a little bit more. But I am laying them in pretty thick. You can see they are definitely going to take hold onto this paper. This is the layer that is going to be the darkest layer. Adding a little ultramarine is going to kind of give me some more variety here too. And adding a little phthalo green is going to bring in some of those really deep, beautiful green shades that I think look so pretty in the Northern Lights and go so good with this palette. So now we're going to blend these edges where the watercolors hit the yellow and the white. We want to kind of maintain it, so that's where I am applying the water to and using gravity just to let it melt right off the paper onto my poor paper towel that is so overly saturated with color right now. It's like, are you going to keep any of the color on the paper? Because it seems like all of the watercolor is now in the paper towel. It does seem like we waste a lot of color doing it this way, right? But you just can't get those blends any other way. I am going to have to do some major cleaning on my surface to get that phthalo green out. It's time to add the details. You know, this is going to look so much different once we put in the foreground. So I'm mixing a little bit of the night sky with a little bit of my ultramarine blue and deciding what's going to be my horizon line. I think I'll start here. Okay, so I'm just establishing a basic horizon line. So this one is just going to kind of be mountainous, and as you can see, just by putting that contrast in there, your Northern Lights are going to start coming alive in a way that you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think this looked that good, but it looks so good once you put the shadow line in. And this is just the first one. So I am actually going to show you how to do trees because mountains are pretty easy. But I did want to put in kind of like a mountainous line here just in case you decide to do mountains. So this is what it looked like if we did one line of mountains in just the dark shadow. Right now I'm going to take the same color and I'm going to draw some lines up for where my trees are going to be. And remember, we have foreground trees and background trees. So usually I make some of the smaller ones the background trees and some of the larger ones the foreground trees. That's just, I don't know, the way I do it. Taking the end of this amazing brush that has so much snap to it, we can do trees so easily. So I'm basically just kind of taking a very loose hand and using the tip of the brush to just kind of squiggle out some lines. Now here's the key. When you do your trees, leave a lot of space in between the branches. You can always go back and add more, but you can't add less. And you want some of these pretty yellows and colors peeking through as much as you can. Because when you stand back and look at this, if you've made it too heavy, you're going to be like, oh, I wish I didn't do that, you know? But you can always make it heavier once you have the ability to stand back and take a look at it. The thing you can't do is you can't lighten it up once it's there, because the shadow is there for good. So go gingerly and just kind of get a rhythm going and put some really kind of feathery random trees or whatever kind of tree you really like. Just remember, branches have spaces, and the spaces are what make the northern lights really shine. So try not to cover a lot of it. You see what I mean? You can always go back and add more in and make it a little thicker in the trunk area, but you cannot take it away. So I just repetitively warn you not to do it that way. So a lot of times when I'm trying to do these trees, it's really easy to make them all look the same. You want to try and vary the heights of the trees. You also want to try and vary the strokes of the branches. So you don't want it all looking the same. If you've ever looked at these skylines of these trees, they definitely have some odd branches coming out, some, different shapes. Some of them are a little bit lopsided. There's all kinds of things going on in nature that you want to try and keep in mind and not make everything cartoonish by making the trees look all the same. The more like maybe Dr. Seuss they are, or the more oh my gosh, what is the name of that director that does all those creepy cartoon movies? What is his name? Oh my gosh, I can't remember, but I always think of that when I do stuff like this, because I always feel like it's more leaning towards his type of work, Anyway, just try and make them not all the same. I would say that is one of the big things to remember when you're doing it. Can I just say, look at the northern lights. Can you believe how they're starting to come alive already just because we have that contrast in there? The minute you add the trees, it looks so good already. Another thing I like to do is make the base of the trees just a bit more dark. So sometimes I'll go back and just kind of brush over it. But what I did in some of my tutorials is I actually did the shape of the mountain over the trees. Don't do that. Definitely just put the mountain in the back, make it just ever so much lighter, and do the trees darker, because when you repaint over the mountain, it just all of a sudden makes the mountain look like it's coming closer to you. And that is something that I have often made the mistake of doing and never really realized it, because I typically don't do this kind of painting for sale. So it's just kind of like a fun painting, and I don't go back and analyze it like I should. But now looking at it and thinking about it as a tutorial, paint the mountains first. Don't put the mountains in last, because it's just going to look like they're above, like in front of the trees. And there we go. We have our number 1 tutorial finished. See how dramatic the northern lights look? Now, if you rewind this video and go back to where we had just the lights, it nowhere comes alive like it does once you put the foreground in. You see what I mean? Like, look at the difference. Like, this looks good, but it looks way better once you have added the foreground. Now, this one I think we're going to do a lake scene, because I know a lot of you guys like to do water. So I thought I would kind of like, make something that's not too calm, but kind of fun. And I don't think I'm going to do it this way. I kind of like the northern lights going more vertical than horizontal, even though we probably will do a horizontal one at some point. But let's mix more of the night sky with some ultramarine, so we can get kind of like a blue tinted shadow for this one. It'll kind of pick up some of the ultramarine that I used in the background. Doesn't that haze look so good? And then the area with the yellow looks so amazing. That can be more of our more dramatic reflection. So right now I'm just kind of painting in a very, very thin line. on the horizon line. This brush is amazing for it because it's got a lot of snap. And I'm trying to scratch in with the tip of my brush just a little bit of the dark color, leaving a lot of light. Now the more light I leave, the more bright the reflection will be. The more dark I put in, the more contrast it will look. So it depends on what you want your look to be. And I gave you another example of this where I left a very, very large portion of yellow on the lake. So it just depends on how you want to do it. Right now I'm putting one tree over here in the corner just to kind of give myself some perspective and figure out how big I want the mountains to be, because that's what my next thing is going to be. But this tree ultimately is going to sit more in the foreground at the front of the lake, and this horizon line is in the back of the lake, so that's where the mountains will be. So let's kind of figure this out here. Loading my brush with the mixture that I made, we're going to start etching in some areas that will end up being our mountains on the horizon line. I'm doing the darker ones first because, I really don't know why I do the darker ones first. Sometimes I just do. I think we have to lighten our mix if we're going to get a lighter version of it. So I wanted to see how dark this appeared before I did a lighter version, because ultimately I want to put in a layer of lighter mountains in the background. But in order to do that, I have to kind of ruin my mix a little bit. And right now I'm painting in the contrasting shadow legs. So this is the reflection of what I just painted on the horizon line. It does not have to be perfect. You can always tweak it later. Right now I'm just kind of getting in just a little bit. And you can see that I'm leaving some more light behind it, which I think looks really cool. Going in and just darkening those up just a bit. And shoring up those lines, because some of the lines I like, some of the lines I don't like. So this is just like a regular process of seeing what looks good. Adding the shadow, just kind of tweaking it a bit until I get something that I like. Rinsing out my brush, getting a little more blue, and now we're going to try and do a lighter version for the back mountains. So I just tap my brush on the paper towel just to get some of the excess water out, and I'm going to use this lighter mix in my lake just to kind of dry brush in some of the water in the lake, but I don't want to cover too much of the beautiful northern lights and the reflection. Ultimately, I kind of think I covered too much of it, but right now it looks really good. I just think, I don't know if like the center area where it's reflecting the mountain even needed to be there. I kind of feel like this would have just been fine with the lighter mountains in the background, but I don't know, you'll see what I mean. So adding a little more water to my mix. I'm going to try and really dilute it now. And this is why I didn't dilute it before, because I just had this one palette with me and I didn't want to ruin my dark mix. But I lightened it up, and I'm just going to paint those back mountains, starting at the top of the mountains just to get the shape in, figure out what I'm doing, and then I'll just blend down towards the other horizon line that I already built. Pretty easy to do. As long as it's not too wet, it won't really reactivate the first layer, even though the first layer is slightly wet still. Ultimately, it'll just make it more shadowy. And if it does liquefy it too much, you can always wait till it dries and then just re-put in that horizon line layer exactly the way you feel like you want it. But see how the northern lights are coming? they're really coming alive as we paint. It's like, it's amazing how different it looks once you put the shadows in. It's like without the shadows, you just don't see the contrast, especially like with the yellow. And now that you've seen this, I know you're going to be adding a ton of yellow because, you know, like those shots of yellow in one side or the other or throughout it, and the shots of the northern turquoise just make such a difference in the northern light. So again, we're going to do some trees. This is my foreground tree. So this one is going to connect with the very bottom of the painting, which is the very front piece of your vision. You know, your the angle of your vision. So this would be more of the focus, but it's off to the left, not right in the center, because I want us looking more towards that yellow streak right in the on the right. And in order to do that, we have to kind of like put a tree to the right and then also put a tree to the left, but leave plenty of room and space for our eye just to kind of take that all in. You see how bright the yellow is looking now, especially as I add the foreground. This is the foreground that is right close to us. So it's going to be the darker of all three of these levels. And the tree is actually going to be a little bit lighter than the foreground that I just painted. And that will help us establish depth, because if I were to make this tree the exact same like darkness of the foreground and do it really heavy, it would just look like it was part of that first layer instead of another layer with a little bit more dimension. Just don't forget to remember to leave lots of space in between the branches so that those beautiful lights come through and there's a lot more to look out and not just a shadow. You can always add more, but you can never add less. So just do that as a rule and add one little bit at a time. Get that tree as thick as you want, but just not overly thick in the beginning, I guess. So again, one of the things that I like to do on these trees is just kind of use the very tip and a very light hand and just kind of scratch those little branches in randomly and try and make them as uneven as possible. I'm going to put a second tree that is a little bit closer to where I'm standing if I were standing looking at this scene. So it's going to be a little darker than the first tree that is the biggest tree. The biggest tree is a little bit farther into the background, and that's leading our eye towards that little horizon line where that peak of yellow is. Now just shoring up that front line with a little bit more watercolor just to make it really pop so it's dark. And we are pretty much done. This tree I just made just a touch darker because this is going to be the other anchor on my painting. So I have two trees that are the very first layer, like the closest to where I'm standing, in other words, right? So we've got that kind of like a little bottom shadow there, and then two trees, and then the bigger tree is a little farther away. Isn't this just lovely? I love the way they turned out. But again, don't you think that the northern lights look brighter and stand out more now that we have all the shadows in? Because I just feel like they just really come alive. If you wanted to add any stars or make this a little darker, then you would just keep adding those darks during that wet layer and wait till they dry, and then you can shoot it with a little bit of white. I like to use Dr. P.H. Martin's white, and the white paint you could put like on a toothbrush or just like a fan brush, but cover the bottom of your watercolor paper and try to only get the light, the stars on the dark. Don't try to put stars on the northern lights because it never works out. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Hope you learned something. I tried to do a variety of things for you guys while coming out with something just that looks really cool, dramatic, and different. I love the way these looked. I think they look so unique and so different from the average Northern Lights. What do you think? Do you like the way it turned out? Do you like the watercolor palette? I would love to hear back from you. Thank you so much for joining me for the 2025 first palette of our year for Northern Lights. This is Jacqueline Jacks from Jacks Watercolor. Wishing you all the best for a wonderful, happy new year.